All right, we are live, and this is the Live with Sondra show. I'm your host, Sondra Shannon, and the CEO of Gatemaster Technology, and that is who is bringing this program to you today. I'm super excited about today's guest and the conversation we're about to have. But first, before we get started, I have a question for you, the audience. How many of you have ever felt completely unprepared for a tough conversation at work or just having to wing it? Well, today's guest believes that might actually be your superpower. So if you don't know who we're talking about, let me give you a few more hints. Our guest today is the founder and CEO of Improv at Work LLC, helping organizations enhance leadership engagement through culture through improv-based strategies. She's a faculty member at Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management, teaching executive presence, presentations, and navigating difficult conversations. Conversations, as you know, if you watch my show, are sometimes hard for me. Former director of guest experience at the Museum and Science and Industry and John G. Shield Aquarium with 18 years in museums, zoos, and attractions. She's a lifelong improv expert, previously a faculty member at Second City Training Center. She cannot live without her murder mysteries. Now, without further ado, please help me welcome Heather Barnes to the Live with Sondra stage. Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for that awesome introduction. And it is just fabulous to be here. I'm really excited about today. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for being here. You know, I always read the bios that get sent over to me, and I love that question about like what you can't live without, what your favorite things are. And I thought it was really cool that you said you're reading your murder mysteries. I have this I think technically he might be called like an IV nurse. He might even be watching. He usually watches my stuff. I have an IV nurse that always comes around. I get my NAD shots and he takes good care of me and keeps me healthy, especially with as much as I travel.
Yeah.
And going to events. And he is an actor at a improv murder mystery theater here in Denver, which I thought you would appreciate. So maybe
Yes.
come out here to Denver. We might have to go. I've actually never gone and seen him. He just tells me about it every time.
Yeah.
But I would love if you ever make it out to Denver. Maybe that's something we've got to do is go see him.
Oh, that'd be a blast. I love it. I love trying to solve the crime. So I like the huge range, true crime, fiction, and crime with theater. I grew up watching Clue, the movie, as a kid, and we act out the parts. And we have murder mystery dinner parties at our house where people role play. So I just think it's a hoot. It's a blast.
I love it. I love that. I during the pandemic, my friends and I would get together and do kind of a murder mystery virtual, but we would get dressed up. And you know, I don't know. I should not be a detective because I certainly was not the one who ever solved the crime. And even when I go to escape rooms,
Oh, those
I don't
are
know. I'm
fun.
like an observer. I don't know what that means says about me, but I actually find it fascinating to watch other people solve the crimes, but
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
that's part of the conversation we're going to have today when we talk about leadership
Yes.
and improv. And I did tell I didn't say, but we're going to be talking about the power of improv leadership and boosting culture and resiliency. And before we get started, is there anything that you think the audience needs to know about you, who you are, besides the bio? It's an amazing bio, but is there anything else that about you that we should know before we jump into the questions that I have for you?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing that the audience could know is that every position that I've ever had, I have felt unprepared for, or I felt like I have imposter syndrome, or that I'm not qualified enough, or good enough, or smart enough, and that I'm not worthy. And I think that improv mindset is something that's helped me say, yes, and I can do this. I can figure this out. I can believe in myself. And that's hard to do sometimes, especially when faced with failure and challenges. And I approach life that way. Even this session we're having together, it's like, yeah, you get nervous beforehand, or you think, I haven't done this before, and you're second guessing. And it's like, yes, you can do this. Do the best job you can. Show up and give it everything you've got. And I just think that's something that it is innate in me that I a value that I have is to yes and that yes and philosophy of life.
I love that. And I know that you've mentioned your yes and philosophy, and I'm curious how leaders use this to embrace communication and collaboration. I love that yes and. One of my friends before sorry, I know I just asked you a question. One of my friends always said, always say yes.
Ah,
So I really love this
yeah.
idea.
Yeah, and it's hard. One of the things that I like to make a distinction on, there's a few things. The first is that with yes and, it doesn't mean yes and I agree with you, let's go. That's great. It
Sure.
means yes, I'm acknowledging what's been put out there. I'm listening to you. I'm trying to understand where you're coming from, and that's the yes. So some people think, especially when I work with different groups, it's like yes, and you're right, and we have to do this, and that's very different than agreeing to what someone said. And I try to take that approach, and I'm not always successful at it, and it is hard. And I do get challenged often. Oh, you're not doing real improv. You're right. We're not doing two-person scenes, but it's more the philosophies of improv about listening, responding, taking in what your audience is telling you and working with that in some way. And I think that's the yes and philosophy that I hold to of life, or just in leadership. And it's hard, even when you have a combative person, you want to try and understand where they're coming from, or someone that is definitely not agreeing with you. And this just happened in a meeting I was in right before this. I shot out an idea and someone said, I strongly disagree with you. And I think before I would have gotten shut down or gotten scared. And I was like, okay, let's explore that. Tell me more about what it is and why you disagree with me. And I think it's just a safer space to be a leader and as a collaborator. And how do we embrace people that aren't on the same page as you?
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned like disagreement, right?
Yeah.
I have some teenage boys, one in particular, very much his own thinker, very different than everybody else at times.
Yeah.
And one of my mentors that I've trained under and worked with, one of his philosophies is always be agreeable. So we
Mm,
try to teach that to our kids. And it's to your point, it's not always that you are truly in agreement, but when you
right.
agree with people or
Right.
at least acknowledge them
Right.
with that yes, the reason he says always be agreeable is because people like people who agree with them. That automatically puts
Yeah.
you in a common
Yeah.
in a in
Yeah.
a, in a common space
Yeah.
or on a level that's equal, right?
It does. And it's about finding that commonality. So let's pretend your teenage son says, I want to go out until 2 in the morning. And you're like, that's a hard no, or whatever the criteria is. Can you agree that, I get spending time with your friends is so important on this special day? And how could you maybe do that in a way that also works for both of us? So it's how do you go to that instead of saying no? And I learned this through another faculty member at Second City. She had just had a brand new baby and they had a toddler, and the husband came home and looked at her and said, I want to go camping. And she thought in that moment she was going to kill him because there's a toddler and a newborn that's weeks old. And she's like, how am I going to get this camping stuff ready? How am I going to is he on Mars? And she just wanted to have this strong negative reaction, which our
Sure.
brains are taught to go to the negative. Instead, she took a big breath. She's like, how do I yes in this situation? And she said, yes, I would love a vacation too. I'm in desperate need of one. Let's talk about how we might do that with these little things attached to us right now. And I felt like that was such a good example of, I would have reacted and said, no, are you crazy? Look at what we're dealing with. And it's hard. It's not easy. And I have to remind myself, but when you hit things from an area of commonality, or what is the common ground that we both believe in, it's a safer space to explore options.
Yeah. Also, I think it just creates an environment, like you're saying, a safer space, an environment where people can communicate easier,
Right.
right? Because if you're automatically in disagreement,
Right.
you want out of there.
Right.
I mean, completely real. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure, like you just mentioned, you were just in that situation. This happens a lot more in
Yeah.
business than we like to admit that
Yeah.
we are in disagreement with each
Yeah.
other, but we still got to get through it.
We do. And one of the things, so you mentioned I'm a faculty I'm an adjunct lecturer at Northwestern University, and I love it. I absolutely love it because I am learning new things about business, and they're getting ready to launch a Center for Enlightened Disagreement. And they're
Mm.
embracing different people's points of view. And normally as a society, we fear disagreement, or we immediately shut down. And we have all these preconceived notions of conflict or disagreement. And it's approaching it not from a place of, oh boy, this is bad or negative, but how do we understand one another? How do we work on a relationship? How do we find some common ground and not fear disagreement or difficult conversations?
Yeah.
Um,
No, I like that. I read Dare to Lead, and
yeah,
Brene Brown's book.
yeah,
What I really appreciated about her is that she talks a lot about like rumbling and vulnerability, which I think is very similar to what you're saying. Like sometimes it is vulnerable to be in agreement when you're really not in agreement, but you're just trying to acknowledge that this person feels a certain way.
yes,
So, for instance, if somebody calls me a game master and says, "Hey, this thing's expensive," I'm always like, "Yeah, it is,"
yeah, yeah,
because, and the reason is because it does blah 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 blah, or whatever that looks like, right? So, I think that just, and usually that like disarms people when you're like, "Yeah, I agree with you," even in
right.
those conversations, the
Oh,
sales
sure.
conversations, because I'm fully transparent about sales because I believe that that's a big part of where businesses fail. I mean, we know that's the number one reason businesses fail
Right.
is a lack of capital and or sales. So,
Mm,
I found that to be an incredibly helpful tool in communicating the value and
mhm.
getting people through some of the hard conversations is that ability to be able to be vulnerable and
Yes.
also yeah, and I think this is kind of what you're talking about in some ways, and something that maybe resonates with a lot of people. I don't know if I mentioned to you, my kids are all actors.
I don't
All
think I
three of them.
used.
We just
Oh
wrapped the
boy.
show last week.
Yikes, you've got your hands full.
I
Oh boy.
I do. I think they're going to enjoy this conversation when we're done and they get
Awesome.
a chance to watch it. But looking at your and yes philosophy, and I'm curious, how does the improvisational mindset help leaders navigate different conversations and foster positive work culture, with work culture probably being the biggest thing that I'm curious about?
Yeah, sure. And I love this. A comment just came in from Cheryl. It says, absolutely, because improv creates a safe space for us to think on our feet. There's no judgment. It's
Yeah.
play, it's a game. Everyone's in it together. And I think that's one of the things we had in an organization I worked, a vice president that was introverted and absolutely hated the idea of any of this, but would come down and do some of these improv exercises and show that she was vulnerable and accessible and would support everyone. It puts, like you said, everyone on the same playing field. Now, if you go to think about implementing improv in your organization, you do have to say why you're doing it, and you do have to create that safe space. It doesn't just magically happen. It magically happens at the Second City Training Center or in a theater environment. But when you start implementing some of these, we had a lot of change management to work through as well, and talk about the why. We're trying to create a more positive culture. We're trying to create a more safe space. We're trying to make leaders more relatable and more accessible to everybody. And I think from a leadership standpoint, it can do a number of things. You're able to positively reframe things and you're more resilient. You're able to see wins more easily. We did a lot of training on thanking other people and what a good thank you looks like. So I could say, thank you, Sondra. It's great to meet you. Or I can say, thank you, Sondra. It's nice to learn a little bit more about you as a human. And I've been a fan of your work. And to meet you face to face has just been really exciting for me. And I just love that you empowered us to take this wherever it may go today. So I didn't feel too structured and too that's more meaningful to you than thank you, you're great. And so, how can leaders be mindfully expressing gratitude with the team members? And even your world's worst employee is doing something right. And how do we find that and build a relationship around that? And I think that's also important philosophy.
Now, do you feel, because we do a thing around here where we do a lot of role playing, because and this is, I know I'm kind of going off somewhere that you might not have expected this to go. I don't know, maybe you did, but we do a lot of role playing over here just to kind of empower our team in so much that they might be having hard conversations, until I heard about you and met you. And actually, I don't know if you know this. I think the first time I really got to hear from you and got to know you a little bit was when you were on stage during the IAPA Women's Leadership.
That was so fun.
It
The
was fun.
the luncheon or
I,
the session.
Was it the luncheon that you were hosting? I think you were hosting the luncheon.
The, yeah,
I
there was
think
a
that might have been
luncheon.
the first one.
And then the year before was a session where I moderated the panel of four.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's so fun. I'm
And
so grateful.
I'm so glad that you were up there. I'm a big fan of stages. As you could probably tell, I created this one because I think it's a great way for people to get to know you. And so, while this is our first really in-depth conversation on this improv topic and how this is enhancing workplaces, I feel like I know you because you've been able to put yourself out there in a way that most people won't, right? Most people don't want to get on those stages. You
Oh
mentioned
yeah,
a boss who is a total introvert.
yeah,
And that does become a problem in workplaces simply because, oftentimes we may not know how to communicate with somebody like that. We don't want to make them uncomfortable. And so I think this idea of improv is so interesting, especially I'm sure there are a lot of techniques that you use to implement these strategies into workplaces. And because of that, do you see these techniques creating a more inclusive and psychologically safe work environment?
yeah,
And do you have any stories or results of that?
yeah. I do think what's fascinating today, and I've been a leader, and I thought it was extremely hard at times because you have to be technically strong. And I was overly authoritative at times, and I was back to back meetings and stressed. And I left Heather Barnes as a human out of all of this. And research indicates today, there's an article from Harvard Business Review. If anybody wants it, I can make sure you get a copy. It's called Executive Presence Today, or the New Rules of Executive Presence. And what they expect of leaders is to be trustworthy, more vulnerable, more connected. People are even interviewing other leaders to say, would you want to have a drink with this person? And I know there's legal elements surrounding that given your states, but they're trying to get it. Would you relate well to this person? Does this person have a high degree of empathy? And that's that I didn't know that was part of being a leader. And today it's clear. And there are a lot of leaders out there that are technically strong that don't have those skill sets. And I do a lot of trainings on that today. And I do a lot of self-reflection on where I've been most successful and where I've been least successful is because of I've been intentional about building relationships and using some of these strategies and being vulnerable and telling stories of failure and relating to people. And I think in terms of using improv as a philosophy, if you have a good relationship with someone, that's required. If you want them to listen to what you're saying, they have to like you and trust you first. So how do you quickly build that trust? How do you quickly connect with someone? Again, our brains are taught to go to the differences we have with one another and what's going wrong. It's just how we are psychologically rooted to be in that fight or flight response from back in the day. And it's retraining your brain to find commonality and to be okay being vulnerable and to find those moments. And it sounds almost too structured, but you can be intentional and strategic about it too. You can be very mindful about, all right, this is an opportunity for me to be vulnerable. One of the examples I share was I worked for a leader at this amazing organization, and it was in the heart of the Chicago riots. And she stood up and said, I am a white woman afforded lots of privilege, married to a white man who's afforded more privilege. And so I can't begin to understand what some of you are going through. But today I'm committed to working toward making our organization less racist, more inclusive. And I mean, that brought down the house. And so that's what I'm talking about. How can you get comfortable sharing parts of yourself? And I think becoming an improviser makes you think it's not about you, it's about your audience. How can you connect with them for your audience? And so I think
Your
those,
audience being sometimes your team or your customers even, right?
oh yeah. You got to constantly tailor your message to your audience. So I'm trying to think, how can I share a failure with this group, or what might being vulnerable look like with this group? that I'm going to present with, or that I quickly have to build a relationship with? Or how can I get to know this person genuinely and authentically, and not in this forced way, so that I can get to know them and ask about them? And that's also what gets skipped in leaders so much. And I think, well, that's not direct improv. And I get called on, oh, we're not doing two-person scenes, but we're connecting with people more deeply and building relationships first before leading. And those are some basic philosophies of improv.
Well, what I kind of like about this, and I think is interesting, is we've all heard the saying, like the corporate BS bingo. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever heard
Yeah.
that saying?
Yeah.
And I think that, like, for me, because I did not, I'm a first generation professional. I actually had a very at our GT summit, we had some interesting speakers who came to talk to us about HR. One of which is bringing the human back into HR,
Yes.
right? Bring the human experience back into business.
100%.
We are all humans,
Yeah.
but also, one of my guests who's been on the show and also came to speak at this event, she mentioned about understanding who your people are, and sometimes that is having tough conversations, but also doing it with enough tact that they feel included and
Yeah.
inclusive. But she mentioned one time, like, when you know that somebody is a free school lunch kid, you can, because you have this understanding of people, you can give maybe the extra support that they need in a way that's appropriate without really singling out people. And so what I think is interesting about this is teaching people to communicate in a situation. 'Cause for me, I always, you talked about like uh, the imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
And early in my career, my imposter syndrome mostly came around the fact that I didn't know that corporate speak. I didn't
Oh,
know
yeah.
the rules of
Yeah.
business that went unspoken, and often that's what got me into trouble.
Yeah.
I've made a huge effort as
Me
I've developed in my career, and
too.
and been became CEO of the company, which was, if you know my story, this is still unexpected even today. I still look at myself and go, how did I get here? This is a
Mhm.
this is a fun ride. But ending up in this role of leadership and realizing that I wasn't going to get very far being that finger wagging
Yeah.
boss. I was going to get further with them understanding that
Yeah.
I'm a human too.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so, tough conversations are things that I actually search out now in my
Wow.
business and with people.
Good.
I think
Good.
it's important. Even we mentioned the sales cycle. A lot of times,
Yeah.
if you're looking at Game Master, we go real deep. We're like, hey, these questions are intentional because we're going to be married together at some point. Because a lot of business relationships do look like that, and
Yeah.
sometimes what it looks like with your team too, especially
Sure.
you got key man on your team,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
I'm curious, also about the listening piece, right? How active listening, and you mentioned that plays in improving both the employee, but also because our audience is a lot of our audience is attractions. Also, I'm curious how that affects the guest
Oh,
experience.
yeah. I teach an exercise. I can't remember if it came from the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science or Second City or a combination of it all, but it's called listening to understand, not listening to respond. Is a society today, and I am guilty of this 9 times out of 10 every day, all day long. We are guilty of listening to solve or listening to respond. And we're not even truly listening. We're just preparing our own message.
Sure.
I'm doing it now. I'm happy, listening and preparing a message. Terrible. But truly listening to understand feels different. And I have to actually say to myself, okay, Heather, you're going to play that improv game. You're going to listen to understand. And we do an exercise where people have to completely listen for 1 full minute, and then they have to stand up and present to an audience what they just heard to the best of their ability. And people find that they listen much differently than how we are taught to listen in today's society, or how we've adapted to not really truly listening. I think when it plays out in guest experience and with culture, one of the things I learned early on at IAPA is you have to treat your teams or your staff or whatever you call your employees the same way you want your staff or your teams or employees to treat your guests. And I was like, well, that makes sense, because I came in an organization 20 years ago, and supervisors were yelling at people. And it was funny because I came into the organization as a guest and I got yelled at no less than 3 times, one for having coffee, one for heading in the wrong direction. And I mean, I was really yelled at. And so that becomes the culture. If you have a more positive culture and you're having fun with your team members and you're building relationships with them and you're listening to them to understand, not to respond, which is hard and you can't do it in every environment, they're going to do that with their guests. And you have to be intentional. It's not all always organic. You have to put this in job descriptions. You have to train for this skill. I think one specific example is we started using improvisation to hire people in group auditions. And one organization I worked at, this was farther in my career, someone came up to me in another department and they said, "Oh my God, I noticed the staff are so different. Where are you finding these people? I mean, it's like night and day, and you've only been here a couple months." And I wanted to say, it's not how or where we're finding these people, it's how we're auditioning and interviewing them. We're doing group auditions, seeing the skill set, we're emphasizing teamwork, collaboration, relationship building, listening in the audition. And so that's what we're looking for. And before, it was just a one-on-one audition and a one-on-one interview, and anyone can say, "Oh yeah, I love working with people, I'm empathetic, I'm a great listener." But when you put people in a group, you can see this play out when you're emphasizing, in this exercise, we're looking for teamwork, listening, connecting with one another. And then you see that who's able to do that quickly. And so that's one example of using improv in a group audition, changing the hiring practice, and getting people that are better suited for guest facing jobs that can listen and change and adapt and evolve and connect. And so I like to share that success story because I think that it's real, and when you see it come to life, it's a game changer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I think also I kind of like what you said about, when you know who are the people who should be guest facing.
Yeah,
You've had these auditions, you've
right,
run this improv experiment with them. That doesn't mean, in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't going to be a better fit for something else, right? It just means like, no, leaning into people's strengths.
right, right. You want
You
to
know, the worst thing for us is when we have somebody who is afraid of talking to people that's on our support team.
yeah, setting people
And
up
they've
with
got to be in there talking to people. Like that's
yes,
that's part of the role. And certainly don't want anybody getting yelled at, and certainly don't want them getting yelled
right,
at
right,
because maybe their lack of or ability to be able to be in that
right.
situation.
I
Um,
also I brought an example
yes,
because I
please.
did a little bit of prep work. I brought another example. We set out to have a more positive guest experience in one organization. And as a result, we also set out to have more fun with our staff and to change morning meetings from more punitive to more reward. And I pulled a couple comment cards because we used to have about 50% negative comment cards and some 50% positive. But what I love about a couple of these examples is that this was unsolicited feedback we were getting from guests, highlighting exactly what we set out to do. So, just a quick note, thanks for a lovely afternoon. Our family was fortunate. We had a warm, energetic guide who made the experience informative and personal, using equal parts knowledge and humor. This made our tour experience from an average day to overall exceptional. And so, when you are intentional to create a more positive, fun work culture, you're empowering your staff to have a more positive, fun culture with guests. And if you're setting those expectations, we want you to have personal, highly tailored experiences with guests. And you give them examples and you're doing it with your staff, they're going to take that and run with it. And we also got rid of scripts and tried to move more towards outlines so people could use their own voice and people could express themselves as who they were. And all of this is again, a Second City improv philosophy. They embrace that everyone has value, everyone is funny, every single human being has something to offer and add. And I just love that. So I tried to take this philosophy and bring it to organizations that I work with.
I love that. I also, what I also love about this idea is, what an incredible skill to give people.
Yeah.
What an incredible skill to give people because, having been in sales for a lot of my career, understanding the script idea,
Oh yeah.
Things that drives me crazy is that, when somebody can't divert from the script, and you have to, because you're dealing with a human
Yeah.
who is not on script, right?
Yes.
And it
Yes.
becomes very difficult for people to go off script. And so understanding this methodology and maybe even some of these philosophies on understanding how to communicate with people in those
Right.
situations, it definitely is improv. I also think that in those situations where you are just dealing with people versus
Oh
a
yeah.
script.
It's It's funny you bring in the sales example. I was hired recently by a bunch of executives that for a major corporation, and their focus was sales. And they're like, our sales, they're not connecting with people. They're not, and they were kind of like, we don't know what to do. They're not presenting well. They're not engaging. And I said, are they responsible for creating their own material, or do? Oh no. We give them the slides they have to stick to and they have to say. And I was like, well, there in itself is part of the issue. If they're not able to use their own language and be themselves, and they have to stick to the script that's rigid that you're telling me, it's harder to make those personal connections in my view. So I think that was
100%.
yeah.
And even when you apply that to the guest experience, if you have your team who's the front line reliant
Mhm.
on a script, that still seems very transactional. And nobody
Totally.
wants to go to an attraction where they're greeted by a robot
Right. Right.
that
Yeah.
is programmed to give you information the way that, you know what I mean? So, but I think it goes back to what you said, figuring those group auditions help you recognize who those people are that are strong.
Right.
Maybe you put the person who's strongest in an area where they have a lot more traffic than somebody
Right.
who's not, right?
Mhm.
They might just be back up, and that's okay. Like, I think one of the things that I really love, and I because I saw you on stage at IAPA and got to hear a little bit about who you are and some of the things that I think you're advocating for, especially with the female work culture. We're just
Yeah.
coming off of the Women's International Month. And I think that this is very interesting because so many women enter into professional spaces feeling like they have to be one of the guys. And
Yeah.
the truth is, I think that's actually a liability for us at times.
Yeah, it can be. I get that question a lot from women. Like some people, it's a balance. It's definitely balance. I do think women are judged more rigorously than men on this. And I think there have been times I've been way too authoritative. And I had to learn from other women at IAPA that they said human first, connection first. And I have to remind myself, and I challenge myself if I'm at TJ Maxx or a gas station, human first, human first. And it doesn't necessarily come naturally to me if I'm at work because I want to get my work done and the job done and move on. But when it's natural for me when I'm not at work, so I try to practice the skill set in every environment. But I do hear from women a lot, like I'm too bubbly, I'm not human enough. And I do think trying to strike a balance. They're all versions of you. How can you make sure that you're tailoring your message to your audience? And I have to say, if I'm walking into a new client or a new group, a brand new law firm, I'm a little more buttoned up than I might be with you. I know you know a little bit more about me and my background, and uh, we've been connected through IAPA, so that I'm tailoring my message to you in a different way than I might with a brand new client. And I do get that. I do think women are more harshly judged than men in that. And I do like to empower women to say, it's a range, but what feels best to you in the situation, in the environment? And how can you make sure and not check out completely and show up and be human? Because it is a strength of women to be human and empathetic and caring and vulnerable and compassionate. I think that is a huge strike zone. We skip that step sometimes.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I also think it's interesting that you said that a lot of women, it's vulnerable and hard to know what the right thing to do. Like you're
Yeah.
saying, you might have to know your audience, which is what I think is also very cool about what you're doing, teaching people this improv, because that also means being able to deal with that on the fly because you've got to read the room. It's going to
Yes.
change depending on who the audience is. As you said, a new client, you might not be totally out there in all of your glory on the first conversation, but at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure what you're looking for is to work and at least help them find a culture where people can be
Yes.
fully
Yes.
there as themselves to some degree. I mean, they're professional workspaces, you know.
Right.
So that
Right.
shower. come to work and look nice and presentable and
Oh, it's a
whatever
lot.
else the company requires of you. I mean, some of us are probably at home and
Yeah.
don't have that thing that they have to worry about. But you know what I mean? Like there are things that we can do to be professional, but one of the things that I have always not cared for in especially corporate culture is this idea that we should just blend in.
Oh God, no, that's awful. That's not what people want. Employees are saying, and that's part of that article, Executive Presence Today, which I'll send you a link to after this. Someone in the chat said they'd like a copy. What team members, they want to report to someone that is authentic in themselves and human, and they're looking for a leader that's vulnerable and trustworthy and can create these connections and be a strong relationship builder. And what I've learned, there's a article that I assign to students at Kellogg, and it's what's better, voice of authority or voice of warmth? It's actually voice of warmth. And
Wow.
that was surprising for me because I was always voice of authority. I was promoted early on, a young blonde hair, blue eyes. I didn't think people would take me seriously. That's probably what you heard a bit of. So I was really authoritative at times. And I felt that showed that I was competent in these leadership roles. And what I learned the hard way is you have to take a step back, be willing to fail, because that's part of the process. That's part of what creates a safe space for others. And I don't know that I was willing to do that earlier on in my career. Admit when you don't know something. Those were hard things for me to do. And fortunately, I had good female mentors that guided me through that process and that stuck with me. But those can be really hard things to do, especially when you have imposter syndrome. So admitting you have gaps in your knowledge makes it even worse or even more fearful.
Yeah. See, I had a little bit of an opposite experience because I knew that I was being given an opportunity that I had one chance, right? And I've been with Gate Master for 25 years. I started when I was 21 years old.
Wow.
I knew that this was like my opportunity to get
Nice.
myself out of the situation that I was in, having grown up with parents who were both laborers. You
Wow.
know, I knew this was my moonshot, and so
Mm.
it's interesting because and my boss or the founder of Gate Master, as long as I always own the problem, even if I created it, he always had there was always a safe space for me to learn
Cool.
and have those failures. And I feel
Yeah.
very lucky. I've tried to create that environment for people. I
Good.
love that
Good.
you brought that up because I think it's an
Yeah.
important point that you brought up that, we as leaders can't be afraid of failing because people are going to fail
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
around us. We fail all the time. We just don't want to admit it. Right.
Right. Right.
I think for me, the only failures I don't tolerate are the ones where you leave me with the mess.
Yeah.
Because
You
we have to
know,
tackle it together. Accountability is still a thing,
right.
right?
Right. 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 Uh,
Warmth doesn't mean no accountability.
Oh, totally. And I think of I went to a new organization and I was taking big risks, which is part of what I do. And in planning for this big risk, I had some other leaders say, I think this is going to fail. I just don't think this is a good idea. 8 out of 10 were on board, but there were two. They were like, I just think this is going to fail. You shouldn't do this. And we did it. And I had to do extra work and do extra planning and do extra presentations and meet with the president more frequently and the board, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, it was super successful. Awesome. Yay. Uh, Go team. One of the leaders came up to me and said, Heather, I am so sorry I doubted you. You were new. That was awesome. This is the best fundraising program that this organization has seen. The press is calling it the best. The board is calling it the best production they've seen in years. And I doubted you. And as a result, I made you do more work. And I shouldn't have. And I am sorry. My respect for that woman was through the roof. The other leader wouldn't speak to me the whole night. In fact, we rode the elevator down together at the end of the evening, and she didn't say anything to me. And at the very last minute, she said, Our CEO did a good job, didn't she? And I said, Yes, because that was true. I said, Yes, she did. But because that person was vulnerable and said, like, hey, I made a mistake. I made you do more work. I was wrong. In the future, I would trust you hands down. That meant so much to me. And it took nothing for her to say that and accept some vulnerability and humility. And I would do anything for this person to this day, just based on that one moment.
Yeah, because she showed her humanity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like And that's difficult to do. And I have a lot of respect for people who can do that.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the biggest thing in leadership that we've all experienced, are leaders who won't show their humanity, which then makes it very difficult for you to be human
Right.
in those situations. And why she wouldn't give that to you?
Right.
What is that to her?
What is exactly?
What would it have cost her?
Right. And I think that's what they say. Like, there's no failures in Second City. There's only opportunities. And I love. There's an awesome chat going on, which is really fun. There's great comments. It's awesome. We won't take time to read it all, but Destiny just wrote, "Failures are opportunities for us to learn and grow," and that's an improv philosophy. Like, how can we embrace these opportunities? How do we create safe spaces for other people to fail? Because it is essential. And I think I was so busy trying to avoid that early in my career that it did a disservice. And so and by that, I mean, like, how do I create a safe space for others to fail that
Yeah.
in the organization?
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we're still in a working generation of women who, if we had our own businesses in the 70s, it wasn't until 1974 that women could even take out a loan for a business without their husband's permission. That is in many of our lifetimes, and there are still women working today who come from that generation. And so, I also, while I don't want to look in the past, because I think we've made so much progress, and there's not to say that
Yeah.
there is not more progress to be made, but I think, and not to make this about women, but I just, the what you've done at IAPA to create these spaces for women really resonates with me. And I think that there's something to be said that there is a generation of women who were having to pioneer these very uncomfortable spaces. And so maybe
Yeah.
not trickle down some old ways of being. And so it's really refreshing to hear what you're doing and the work that you're doing, especially with regards to advocating for these common spaces,
Yes.
the safe conversations to have. Nobody should be worried about losing or being able to pay their bills because they made a mistake at work. I'm just not a fan of
Right.
that.
Right. I with IAPA, I'm so thrilled that I've been able to. I remember the very first webinar we had on women in leadership, at least that was formally that I was a part of in 2017, and I've been involved in IAPA I think since 2010. And 2017 was this webinar they had me host, and I was a little nervous. And what I learned from those other women that I was just the host brought down it. They were life changing. It was career changing. It was enlightening. And I was like, we have to keep hearing these stories. So, what are these different platforms that we can use to get other voices out about these topics that I didn't even know I was struggling with? That I mean, I had big blinders on. I was like, oh, everyone's equal. This is great. And I just am so grateful that IAPA continues to make that a priority, particularly today, and that IAPA continues to find. They came up with the luncheon and asked me to host, and my instinct, there we go again, was no, because I don't want to host a lunch. I thought I was gonna have to order food for everybody. And they were like, no, we'll do that. I was like, I've never hosted a lunch. I don't know how to pull a lunch program together. I don't know what your success indicators are. It was really overwhelming. And I thought, you know what? This is an opportunity. You say yes. And even though you're scared and it might fail, how can you give it everything you've got, talk to other people and plan? And so I also think that's a way I approach things is from a team standpoint, not just a me standpoint. And with the luncheon this past year, we had 12 spotlight speakers, some men that were talking about how important this topic is. We want to continue to keep that momentum going and include more people. And I've had to look, they're messy conversations in that planning process. There have been some of the messiest, hardest conversations that have made my heart drop, that have made me anxious. Talk about navigating difficult conversations. And in the planning session, some stuff came up, and it's still happening today with planning a webinar. And it's just, how do you keep moving forward through new spaces to create more voices out there? And that's exciting and hard. I'm rambling.
No, I love that because
Yeah.
it's funny, I've been asked to participate in several conversations on these very similar topics. I mean, this is why I love the idea of having you on the show, and I know we're running out of time, and I have so much more I wanna ask you. But I always say, "Hey, if we get to the end of the show and there's still so much more for us to do because I know you had like a game that we could play. So I always say if we don't get to that, it just means you got to come back on the show.
Oh, woohoo!
You got to come
That's
back on the
awesome.
show. We keep this conversation going because we are multifaceted people, and I know that what you're doing is for everyone
Yeah.
in an organization with regards to improv. But just because we both love IAPA so much, I appreciate what they're doing. When I started coming to IAPA 25 years ago, we still had booth bunnies out there.
I've seen them. It was awful.
You
And you
know?
know what? It was some of my team members. I felt it, but I couldn't articulate it. Some of the team members that reported to me said, Heather, this looks and feels like an old white man's club. We don't see any of us reflected here. And they empowered me to help make a change. And I don't know that I would have done it without surrounding myself with smart people that are more articulate than me, and then I can kind of take it and run with it. But yeah, they raised it, they saw it, they felt it, and this was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And
Oh, if there was somebody who looked like me 20 years ago, it was usually, and here's the thing, like today you'll see me. I like pretty dresses. I like pretty things, but early in my career, I dressed like one of the boys.
yeah,
It
yeah,
didn't feel authentic to me. I was trying,
right,
because I didn't want to be seen as
right,
that in
right.
in this space 25 years ago. And I love this industry and I love where we're going and how things have changed. And I really love seeing women like you taking the stage and really owning what the future looks like for our industry and influencing a lot of really good change. And so I want to thank you for that. I want
Thanks.
to thank you for being you and for
Thanks.
helping people find better ways to communicate because I really think that's an important part of business that we don't talk a lot about. And we find ourselves being unsuccessful at it because we don't have tools like this.
Right, right. And the great thing is it can be learned. I
Yeah.
had to learn some of these things. It's trainable. You can learn all of these skill sets,
Yep.
and there's new stuff coming out.
I was just having a conversation with a friend. So I help with a lot of business acquisitions for people close to me and people that I consult with. It's part of another one of the other companies that we have. And I was just having a conversation with somebody today about, we use very little parts of our mind. They found the science is like 10% of our mind gets used, but people who actually decide to take on professional, personal development tend
Mm,
to exercise more of that. Dancers use a lot of it in order to remember choreography. There's
wow.
all these ways that we can expand our mind and our development, and
Yeah.
we have room for it. That's why I bring up 10% of our brain gets used because there is room for it, you guys. There's room for all of this that Heather's talking about. You can add
It's
that
true.
to your repertoire.
Taking,
So
yeah, take an improv class, everybody.
I love it. Well, thank you again for being here and for sharing all of your very valuable insights. I say this all the time. I love doing this show. I love what we're doing for the audience, but selfishly, I also feel like the luckiest person in the world to be able to speak to people who are influencing change in organizations and in a very positive way and in ways that I love seeing the world change because I was one of those people who had a hard time stepping into a professional and corporate scene. And
Mhm.
and as I said, being able to navigate hard conversations really benefited me. So kudos to you for doing that, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, one more thing. I just realized if somebody wants to get a hold of you, if they need help with this, what's the best way to reach you?
I have a website. It's long and clunky, improvisationatwork.com. So you spell it out. Or you can reach me, Barnes Heather, Barnes Heather, the number 25. So Barnes Heather 25 at Gmail is another great place to reach me. And I'll make sure and email you that article from the Harvard Business Review about executive presence today so that you can distribute it in the best way based on
Yeah,
maybe.
we'll put it on the recap, and I think the producers will also make sure that people have access to
Yeah.
your website and how to get a hold of you. So
Oh,
we'll
cool.
we'll make sure that that's
Thank
there.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you'll agree to come back because I really
Oh,
do
I
like
love it.
the conversation, and I think there's a lot more to be had than what
And the
we
chats
for.
are so inspiring. So thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Heather, for being here. Well, so what do you guys think? Do you think that being able to have hard conversations, tough conversations in the workplace is something that is your superpower? Because I think Heather today really made some good cases with her case studies and things that she shared today with regards to like empowering people and in having these conversations, but also seeing how that can create real change in our organizations. I'm really grateful for Heather and all the speakers that come on this show, to my team who supports us throughout being able to, let me just say this team that I have, this is not an easy show to put on. Somebody said to me the other day, like, "Oh, you just started a podcast." I'm like, "No, it legit. We have 5 or 6 people that are constantly working on one, making sure that we have good programming for you, but also making sure that our guests are well taken care of and that they know what they need to do or how to be here. They promote the show for me and allow me to show up and be present for you and for these guests and really allow us to be able to do this because I could not do this without a team that is as amazing as the team that I have. So I just want to take a moment and thank them again today and to thank all of you for supporting us, for watching this programming, for being engaged in the conversation and sharing your thoughts in the chat. Thank you to Heather for sharing her insights. I mean, people like her don't have to do this, and they do this for you. So I hope you found some actionable steps that you can take to better your business and organization, and primarily in the attraction space that we all love and know. So thank you for everybody from the bottom of my heart. So till next time, go out there and be great. And I look forward to seeing you on the next live.